All right, everyone, let's begin with the other panel, which is about the policy dividend, how RBI's approach is powering India's payment innovation. For the same, I would request the moderator, Mr. Srinivasu MN, co-founder, director at Build Desk, to join on the stage, please. And now I would request our speakers to join on the stage, please. Mr. Anirban Mukherjee, CEO at PayU Payments. Ms. Deeksha Kaushal, Vice President, Strategy and Business Transformation, India and South Asia at Visa. Mr. Mahendra Nerurkar, Vice President, Emerging Markets, Payments, Amazon Pay, India. Mr. Nalin Bansal, Chief Relationship Management, Partnerships and Central Government, National Payments Corporation of India. And Mr. Suramya Mohan, General Manager at Reserve Bank of India. I would request the moderator to kindly begin the session.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining this panel discussion. India's digital payments story, the mega success of it is well known to you, so I'm not going to kind of talk through that again. That story has many heroes, some about whom you read in the media, some who are very visible to you, and then there's always a set of unsung heroes and unsaid stories. So one of the key things this panel is going to reflect on is on one of those kind of stories that are not told enough. A reflection on how the policies, the regulatory policies have helped shape this digital payments market, that mega growth that we've seen, and created such a wide and diversified market that enables all of us to participate. All of you in this audience have experienced digital payments either as a innovator, entrepreneur, contributor, most certainly as consumers. And so you fully understand how much India has come in the last 10 years, how much we've grown. So we're going to talk to these policies, and since we have the privilege of having Mr. Suramya Mohan, who heads the policy department at RBI for payments, we're going to ask him a few questions and lead up from there to with the rest of the panel. So, sir, if I can ask you first, RBI has often spoken of India as being a land of a laboratory for inclusive innovation. And you, over the last 8-10 years, in the explosive growth that we've seen in digital payments, I know it might be difficult to pick on one theme or one particular topic, but if from your point of view, if you had to pick on one single policy or one key thing that RBI has done, which has been the bedrock of all this growth innovation, what would you pick that to be?
Thank you. Nice to be here. It's a difficult question to start with, zeroing upon that one thing. But if I were to kind of think about it, maybe the no silos approach and interoperability and allowing all kinds of players. So we would just say probably what we would like to see, and then leave it to the market to decide how it is to be done. I guess that probably would be the summing up of it from our side.
So, sir, if I can just ask a little more on that, it's the next step. The audience is obviously fully familiar, being from the industry. RBI has this construct of creating a vision document, a policy, and the industry draws from it to then kind of build on products to have dialogue. Very curious to figure out, how does this process work at RBI? I mean, how do you kind of shape up the vision document? What goes into thinking? And how does it kind of play out into creating guidelines or policies?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we are, as of now, engaged in working out the vision document for the next couple of years. So this process started way back in 2001. In fact, it predates the setting up of even my department. So the idea is to give some kind of a guidance to ourselves and to the ecosystem out there. And how the process works is, actually how it should ideally work is, that we should be calling for inputs from everywhere as part of a process, that we should be looking at these inputs with the due diligence, that we should be selecting something that is both desirable as also feasible. That covers the entire gamut of issues that are there before us and takes a longer view of things, and ultimately boils down to strengthening the tenets of my policy making as the regulator, which is building trust, taking care of the public at large, and ensuring that the ecosystem develops on sustainable lines. So I guess that is the process. Call for inputs, look at them carefully, select what is desirable and feasible, draw out a roadmap in terms of suggested timelines, and then lay it out there.
Okay. I'm going to switch from there to you, Nalin. Everybody here knows UPI is the crown jewel of the payments success story of India. As the National Payments Corporation, can you tell us, and you've been there with NPCI right from its early days, right? You've seen the full journey. What do you have in your head and in your mind specific policies of RBI or any nudges from RBI that have been instrumental in shaping either the product, the organization, the go-to-market approach, anything?
How much time do I have? Like
As long as you take. As long as you take.
Well, I think there are plenty. Just to call that out. Somaji was mentioning about the principles. Principles, I think, are if you look at the policies that have come out, or guidelines, vision document that come out. I think the vision document really is the one which clearly calls out the principles. And if you track the last 2-3 versions that have come up, it has centered around 2-3 areas. Number one being, it is long-term in some sense, saying 5 years, 3 years, helps the market to plan their innovation, investment, in terms of what is coming up. Should I invest here? Should I not invest here? That's number one, because it starts there. Number two, on consumer side, I think it's absolutely clear. In terms of the fact that whatever we do has to ensure that consumer, disputes, redressals, issues are taken care of at first. We can't take them for granted for any reason. Number three, I think, is, I would say, the primary principle of interoperability and open standards. No matter what we do, should be made available to everybody in the market, every participant, every player, and if it requires to create new platforms, so be it. We'll create new platforms if nobody else is willing to create one. And coming to examples, starting with BBPS, I would say eKYC framework, Aadhaar account aggregator framework. I think, it goes on. I would say there are plenty of those that have come up.
Can I ask you slightly, what I think a difficult or a tricky question based on what you just said? From an industrial market perspective, right? When we think of NPCI, we think of it as a clearing body, national, meaning in terms of the roots that it started off with. But when you talk of making investments into product, building for things, and recently you set up a technology subsidiary, how do you think of the organization, the platform? Because in a broad market thing, right, you have the network, using terms that we're all familiar with, and there's people who are building products to go to the market. How do you think when you say, talk of investments or creating technology products, is there anything that you can share where we can all start building in line with that ahead of the curve?
I think if I were to put this with an example, if you are walking with the crowd, you know where the crowd is heading to. But if you're just looking at from one direction or one particular vision, you will always want to hit at a point which gets you the maximum benefit. And I don't know whether that will work or not. So I think you have to be in the market to be able to figure out where you are going to eventually land. And I think it has been bit by bit. All these things were not set up in one day, starting with NPCI and then, of course, other subsidies and the digital. I think every 1 year or 2 years, we've been building these platforms and then hiving them off into different various subsidies. Knowing how and being in the play to understand where is the current moving towards, both from a regulator point of view, from a consumer demand point of view, from a central government policy point of view. I think all of that comes together to say that, and of course, innovation trend across the world today. I mean, we are doing this whole GFF this year on the back of the theme of AI and whatever we can do from that point of view, right? So I think it helps. It's natural progression. There is no vision.
Got it. So, Anirban, I'm going to come to you next. You and PayU as a business has been in India for many years, and you've seen this transition happen, right? From a time when it was slow adoption, you were one of the early players in the market trying to build adoption. You are one of the larger players focusing on merchants and the SME sector. Talk through how some of these policies have paid great dividends in the segment in terms of adoption or giving comfort to merchants and the sector.
Yes, thank you, Vasu. It's a great question. Till 2015-16, we remember the number of POSs we had in the country. It was very small and it was expensive, right? It was not like the solution was bigger than the problem, as they say. It was very expensive for people. So I think this low-cost acceptance infrastructure through something as simple as a QR, I think that has created this massive digital revolution. And for RuPay debit and low-ticket UPI to be free for the small merchant, and for that acceptance to be so simple, and then the enabling infrastructure that Nalin talked about in terms of eKYC, etc., that just has driven this massive revolution. They say, look, the goal of every technology is to ensure infinite adoption at the lowest marginal cost. And I think we are headed towards that. But that's the SMB side, the consumer side. Consumers using UPI. And increasingly, even with things like we see people who use AEPS, they then jump onto the digital bandwagon. And then everything around trust and safety. So it's a two-sided play, and getting both sides there at the lowest possible cost. And with high trust and safety, I think that is what's led to merchants adopting it. There's still a long way to go, but
Mahendra, if I take up from what Anirban just said, you as Amazon as a group, right, sit in the intersection of both the commerce play versus the payments play to various other convenience services. How do you see this playing out, and how have specifically, if you can also talk through, because you operate in different markets, how have some of the policies that are specific to India helped you kind of better serve the customer here or bring convenience? Or
See, I think at the very foundation of it, Amazon worldwide deals with like hundreds of millions of customers daily and their payments. And so at the heart of it, whether you're selling a book or a t-shirt or an electronic phone or whatever it is, customer trust is at the bedrock. And when we think about customer trust, you're talking about security, privacy, resilience, all done in a very convenient way that is not seen by customers as frictionful while giving them the right control. So whether you operate in a regulated market for payments or an unregulated one, like those are the foundational principles based on which we try to build our customer experience. I think specifically then zooming into India, where I feel the kind of working alongside the industry and alongside RBI, we have really benefited is, I think a lot of these experiences, I'll use a couple of them as examples, but I think when you think about the Indian consumer, our payment preferences are perhaps as diverse as our dietary preferences, right? Like we love choice. We want to pay with cash, we want to pay with cards, we want to pay with our app, we want to pay in installments, we want to pay on delivery, we want to pay in subscriptions. I think not having sufficient standardization does create barriers to adoption of these technologies. So while certain set of customers might feel very comfortable adopting certain technologies, where I feel I really appreciate the partnership with the RBI has been in standardization of some of these frameworks. So I think let's take card tokenization as an example. Of course, Amazon previously used to let customers save cards and use them seamlessly. We also had our patented one-click experience. But there were certain set of customers who did not feel comfortable using that experience. I think what a standardized network tokenization protocol did was really bring every customer into that fold. Same thing we observed with e-mandates. Again, we had a pretty robust experience that certain customers used, but suddenly expanding it to a standard framework brought more customers in. Same thing with UPI. There was ways of paying with the bank. So I feel that there's one aspect of, if you're truly wedded into building customer trust, I think a regulator-driven standardization does bring more customers into the mix, which is always a good thing. I think the second part of it is creating enabling frameworks that go beyond just the act of moving money. Because I think India as an economy, you need people who can be equipped with credit, where people can seamlessly move between their, what I call cash and digital avatars. So I think whether it's a PPI that allows a customer to load cash and then pay digitally somewhere, I think evolving the framework for that in a matter of 2-3 years has been a pretty monumental achievement. Similarly, when you talk about credit, what 5% of the customers in this country have credit cards. So enabling checkout financing by enabling the LSP model, the NBFC model, I think there has been a lot of innovation on the policy side, on the licensing side, and the technology side. And I feel like that partnership has been very vital, and I feel it'll, in the long term, pay much larger dividends than what we are already seeing. Like the e-mandate example, for example, like if you see, yes, initially we went through a lot of friction in terms of getting that standard adopted, but now as you're seeing the rate of adoption grow, I think we'll soon achieve escape velocity.
So are you able to take the learnings or the innovations from here into other markets because you do have a global scale of play?
I think so. And I think, for example, again, like, I mean, just using UPI as an example, right? Every country has a different variant of instant payments. Some have the TPAP model. Actually, most people don't have the TPAP model. It's mostly an India thing. There's things around interchange and how to think about it. But the most fundamental innovation that I feel that UPI in India has, that many of the other instant payment players are learning from, is this model of intent, right? That I could be a merchant and I can seamlessly pay with UPI. Most UPI experiences for online sites are clunky, or instant payments experience are clunky. So I feel like taking that as an example and going to a Egypt or a Brazil and showing that, and then of course there is also direct conversations with you guys happening, I think is like a way in which the technology, the frameworks, the mental models are getting exported.
So Deeksha, let me pick from what Mahendra just ended with. So Visa is synonymous with global payments, right? But I suspect one of the differences from the Indian market versus some of the other markets you operate, Deeksha heads strategy for Visa for this part of the India and this part of the region. So I think appropriate person to answer this. You must be seeing different markets. India is primarily digital, public rails in terms of how we want to build the infrastructure here. Some of the other markets may not, maybe have different models, slightly more close. How do you shape strategies for India in this context, India versus other places?
So, the way that public digital rails in India have got formulated under the vision of the government and the RBI, they're clearly a global benchmark. They're a testament to strong policy frameworks. And when we look at it, it's both the what and the how that matters. And on the how, it starts with the RBI vision document, which we're all looking forward to the next one. It's food for thought for the ecosystem. It's the way consultative discussions happen in terms of framing guidelines, and then when implementation starts to happen. And then, of course, the unwavering focus on customer security and trust. And when we look at Visa's journey, over the last 70 years, where we've got to today, is that we serve about 200 countries and territories. And we've been in the India payments landscape for the last 40 years. And we're committed to be here for many more decades to come. And as part of our India strategy, our focus is clear. How do we bring our network to work, not only for consumers and for merchants, but to the service of the policy direction and the imperatives that the country has? And in that lens, I would say that there are 3 priorities which are very clear for us in India, which would be nuanced for this market and how it could be different for different markets. So for India, the number 1 is to continue this aid of this entire movement to reduce cash, because there's still about $500 billion of cash circulating in the economy. So how can we partner with players across the network to advance digital inclusion? The second one is access to credit, because 1 in 2 Indians still don't have access to formal credit. Almost 60 million MSMEs, and they contribute 30% to our GDP. They need access to reliable working capital. And as we look to broaden credit opportunities in the ecosystem, we would love to partner with banks, fintechs, et cetera. And then the third, which is at the heart of it, is security and safety. Because trust, as Mahendra was saying, is also the foundation of fintech. And yet, last year, globally, almost $10 trillion in cybersecurity crime. What we've done at Visa is that for the last 30 years, we're investing in various AI tools. And last year, we helped the ecosystem save $40 billion globally in fraud. And we're bringing these tools to India to help share our expertise wherever possible, and we'll keep doing that. One of the examples is we partnered with the Rashtriya Raksha University in Gujarat to provide cybersecurity training to students, some of whom could be law enforcement officers tomorrow. So I think we're committed to saying that under the government's vision of Viksit Bharat, $30 to $40 trillion economy in 2047, how can we play that part collectively in the ecosystem to help continue this vibrant, secure, inclusive, and innovative payments infrastructure?
Sir, I'll come back to you again from what Deeksha is saying. So from a market, you've heard market participants on the panel speak of how they execute linked to, let's say, policies that you create, the frameworks, and how it helps them, like Nalin said, sometimes plan investments to figure how do you balance this. From an RBI perspective, as you do this, I think one feature of the Indian market has been, unlike other spaces in regulation here or in other parts of the world, RBI has managed to kind of, if I can use the term, stay ahead of the curve, right? Come up with something proactively, which often leaves participants trying to read through the lines to figure out what is intent, what should be scope, what are the areas we can. How do you stay ahead of this curve? I know it's maybe an internal thinking question, maybe part of the RBI study, but very curious. These are not publicly known, so.
No, thank you. You're very kind. I would not presume to believe that it's good for us to stay humble and not to believe that we are always ahead of the curve, but let's just say that we are abreast of the developments. And that is a conscious decision, and it comes from the fact that when we see ourselves as the regulator, we don't see ourselves as just the gatekeepers. True, we have that role to play at some level, but we also see ourselves as facilitators, as developers, as catalysts, as partners. So once you see yourself in that role, all these other things come along with it, benchmarking yourself with what is happening in the market out there, listening to the ecosystem, trying to understand the pain points, keeping the focus always on genuine user needs. Once all that is inbuilt into the DNA, everything else comes along with it. And developing a vision which is long-term helps, and not missing the woods for the trees, that also helps. So I would just say that's the way we have been kind of trained within the organization. That's how the organization looks at it. So it is second nature to us.
Okay, so a spot question based on what he's just said. He's articulated how RBI thinks of itself in framing the policies. All of you are part of the ecosystem. If you had to use one sentence, one word to describe how you look at the regulator in India, left to right, Anirban downwards. Nalin, you get the maximum time to think, but how do you look at the regulator in India?
I think protagonist is the one word. Always thinking ahead and trying to shape it.
My spot answer is consumer trust. I trust as a consumer, and because I serve consumers, I also trust as a professional that that's at the heart of it.
I would say it's, I view it as a collaborator in solving customer problems, building trust, and there's always room for dialogue. So it's not like a one-way street, which is something that I really appreciate.
Can I say you had the maximum time to think. So.
Yeah, can I say all of them? Actually, I would say all of them. Inclusive, trust comes first, inclusive, consultative, forward-looking. I'm struggling to think that in most of my interactions outside this country, and I ask people, of course, everybody talks about UPI, but when I ask about fraud to sales ratios and things like that, so I always go back and think, maybe I'm thinking my number wrong because it's sounding very low. So really, should we really import more fraud practices, or should we export more regulatory practices? Is a question I would rather ask.
So let me add my perspective there on that too. And having dealt with RBI over the years, I think beyond all these terms, which I like Nalin, I would say include, but I think given what we see of regulation in India and some of the other markets, I would think if I had to pick one word, I'd pick as progressive. Even within the country of various places we get to adopt, I think one of the challenges for any incumbent, and this is often thought of in terms of businesses. If you have an incumbent process, how do you move to changing dynamic? I think it was incredibly tough for an institution that is a regulator to be open to saying, I am progressive, I want to change the way I work, sometimes seeing what's happening in the market, and therefore how do I build it as opposed to kind of, let's say, break it down or not allow it to happen. But being in touch with saying what is happening, and therefore how do I proactively build. I think it needs a progressive culture first to be able to do that. Right? Otherwise, it's tough to do. You could have an individual wanting to do it, but for an institution to do it, it has to be cultural to say, I'm progressive in nature, I'm open, I'm going to take inputs and do it. I think among the various initiatives that we've seen, we've been setting up like a dialogue each month with participants saying, if you have queries to answer, to taking feedbacks, to I think putting out drafts for circular for discussion. I think those have all been phenomenally enabling aspects of this.
And so I would just like to add, not to forget the diversity that we are dealing with. To say that everybody will operate in the same fashion is really tough. So there has to be some principle based, and then of course the market will have to implement in some fashion.
So sir, if I can then use what Nalin said, as you kind of straddle this organization culture of being progressive, proactive, to wanting to build, to also working towards the India digital vision, you would see a lot of stuff happening in the marketplace. There are a lot of innovators here building products. One common theme to which businesses as they build is to kind of push the envelope a bit to see what can you build, not build. How do you help build something which the market needs, and that might kind of go into be a self loop of saying, I build a product, regulator looks at it, creates the framework for it, etc. Two questions, when you think of policies, how do you balance, what are the various aspects you balance? Having seen, let's say, market development, or if you're proactively doing something, what are the two key principles? Like, what are the key principles that drive balance? And second, anecdotally, if you can share, have there been things that you turned down, saying that while sort of people building the business might want to do something, or the market segments of market population might want to need, in the larger interest of things or any other perspective, are there things that you put very strong guardrails to say you don't want it going in a certain direction?
At the risk of sounding a bit diplomatic, I'll take the second one first, and I'll say that we don't really turn down anything. Everything stays in the system. Maybe the timing for that has not yet come, so we would take it up as part of the continuous dialogue and continuous process of policy making. To come back to your first question, as to what are the principles, I think you articulated them well enough, and all the other speakers have already covered it: trust, stability, and other things. What we would be looking at is not to take any proposal as an isolated thing, because we have to see the linkages, we have to see it in terms of sustainability, security, how it fits into the entire puzzle, how it fits into the entire picture of Indian digital payments. So for us, no proposal is seen in isolation. It has to be seen in terms of its impact, real or perceived, upstream and downstream. It has to be seen in terms of the signals that we give out to the market if we were to actually build a policy around it. And sometimes it's a policy decision not to make a policy also. Because every policy, once it comes out, even if it is principle-based, lays down certain do's and don'ts. Maybe sometimes it's a good idea to just let the market play out for a little bit longer while we observe and then decide as to what the policy response should be. It also comes down to ultimately being very clear about the red lines. So for example, securing funds is something that is absolutely paramount. The other thing would be probably, while you benchmark yourselves with international best practices, be grounded and stay close to the local realities. So these are some of the things that normally we would keep in mind. I would not hard code them, but I guess, yes, these are the common factors.
So Anirban, in the context of all the, let's say, the guidelines that have emerged or the regulation that has emerged, in what frame, do you have a broad framework on how these are creating growth opportunities for people operating in, let's say, a vertical or a silo? How do these enable you, particularly for somebody like you who kind of gone from payments to credit to whichever? How does all this play out for you?
Oh yeah, look, I think Mahendra, Deeksha both talked about how under-penetrated credit is, especially in MSME. It's a big driver of GDP growth as well. I think this transaction data and using the transaction data to lend to SMEs, we are finding a lot of initial success in it. I'm seeing a lot of platforms do that. So think of sellers on PhonePe, sellers on Amazon, and looking at the cash flow. And look, it is, you have to think differently from the Western construct of month-end EMIs, right? Because you have to match the cash flow. That's where you have to create products for Bharat. And there's a lot of success when you use this payments transaction data and match the repayment to what their input cash flows are. So there's miles to go, but I think credit based on transaction credit, flow-based credit based on payments transaction data and this digital trail is just, I think, a big killer app for, and a big problem to solve. We have a lot of faith and a lot of capital we are putting into it. There's also, of course, look, other things, SMEs, this PACB and helping specific segments of small merchants export. There's a lot of good work happening on that. There's also work, once a merchant starts their digital journey, then things like bookkeeping and accounting and GST, a lot of that, like you can digitize the whole setup of the merchant, help them with their customers. So many more ways to build businesses and product lines on top of core payments.
So Mahendra, from what Anirban was saying in terms of the focus on merchants to credit, from balancing both the commerce and the payments flip kind of thing, do you see embedded finance as being the next big wave thing for somebody like Amazon and in the payments place?
I wouldn't call it the next big wave. I think it is already happening to us. I think some of these terms kind of mean different things to different people, right? Like the way I see it is, it's ultimately about making the consumer's journey trusted and simple, such that they can shop on a e-commerce site, travel site, what have you, and how to bring the right financial products at the moment of truth, right? So some of the examples that I briefly touched on earlier are already doing it, in my opinion. For example, if a customer who is today credit underserved can be served multiple credit options from different lenders through the LSP model and can then check out in that same journey, to me that's embedded finance already happening in live action. If a cash customer can say that, hey, like, you know what, I trust this merchant enough, I want to deposit my cash into your PPI such that I can subsequently start paying digitally, that is embedded finance already happening in live action. If a customer can get a range of insurance options to pick from as they are buying their next air conditioner or next mobile phone, I think that's embedded finance happening already in live action. So I feel like I don't think it is like waiting to happen. I think what I believe we will see is potentially greater democratization of options. Today, much like when you want to pay, you have a very democratic way to pay, perhaps the most democratic way to pay of all the countries that I work with. I feel some of these lending products, insurance products, investment products probably have like that one step away still from that level of democratization. And I think to enable that, besides the like solidifying the data sharing frameworks, which I think is going to be foundational, as Anirban touched upon, I think making sure that those frameworks and policies really hold a very high bar on data privacy and dark patterns will be very important, because customers will, it'll take one or two use cases for the customers to lose trust in this system. So I feel like getting that right is going to be very foundational. And I think while simplifying payments is great. I feel simplifying some of these financial products will have a much direct impact on the economy at a much faster clip. So as you think about like from a 2030, 2047 backward perspective, I think democratizing these products will be like the big thing.
Deeksha, you must be finding, as Visa, the Indian market different, I'm assuming, from various other markets. One, specifically in the last 5-6 years, right? The growth here has been explosive, different forms of product, and I think an extremely vibrant fintech space, right? You're what, between any number between 5 to 10,000 entities participating. From your perspective, in a market where typically the public infrastructure dominates, how do you differentiate from merchants, consumers? How do you think of value proposition for these segments, and how do you differentiate for them?
Actually, that's a great question and something that's very close to our hearts in terms of how do we create value not only for our consumers, but for our network partners and for the ecosystem. And I'll answer this on 3 layers. The first one is the foundational layer, and I think we've heard that on the panel, but it's just like so fundamental to us. It's trust, safety, and security of transactions. And this is not a one-done thing, because bad actors are also evolving every day, and therefore the cybercrime numbers are what they are. And therefore we take this extremely seriously in terms of what do we do to make our transactions safe and secure every day. We're investing in tools such as Visa Advanced Authentication, Visa Risk Manager. We work with our banking partners, fintechs, to see how can we layer transaction data, not only to protect transactions on payments fraud, but also these social engineering scams that are happening today. So that's the foundational layer, I would say, for payments and for us. On top of that comes the experience layer. Experience layer can mean a lot of things to different people. So depending on the segment, persona, your age in life, it could mean, for example, a flex credential where you can take a debit and a credit credential on one token. It could mean having a cashback on your most valued brand where you like shopping. It could mean access to a music concert, and I could go on. So I think building that experience layer in the market for personas where it's relevant is the second way that we add value to merchants and to consumers. And the third way is how do we make our value propositions future ready? And I think in today's day and age, clearly that's how do you think of embedding commerce in Gen AI, thinking in terms of what would it do not only to consumers in terms of the choice that they would get, but importantly to the MSMEs of this country, because they can benefit so much. A lot of the things that Anirban said in terms of reconciliation ease, expensing, access to inventory for a lot of their consumers, those are places where Gen AI can help them. And those are areas which we think of in terms of how do we build value and differentiation for consumers and merchants.
Can I ask you a very specific question? Cross-border payments still remain very expensive. As Visa, what are you doing to help to kind of make it cheaper, faster, better? What are the right terms?
I have to tell you that Visa did a survey of 44,000 respondents across 20 countries who are involved in sending and receiving remittances. Almost, by the way, 1 billion people in the world are either sending or receiving remittances. The overall number is $900 billion in volume. India is large at $135 billion out of it. And the single biggest pain point of these consumers is high fees. What are we doing about it globally? We have a platform called Visa Direct, which is across 190 countries, 160 currencies, 11 billion credentials on wallet, cards, and accounts. What that sort of connectivity does is it makes transactions faster, cheaper, and more transparent. In India, our principles are that we want to bring such sort of capabilities to use. But there are 2 guiding principles. 1, we will work within the regulatory framework as we explore these solutions. 2, we will partner with banks, fintechs, and various stakeholders of the ecosystem as we get this to consumers.
Nalin, can I ask you a question? We're looking at how this growth in India has played out, what's been effectively the benefits of the various policies. Any interesting data points that you want to share? You sit on potentially, I would think, both a macro and a micro view of what is happening in this space, right? UPI, as I said, indisputably the crown jewel, and you kind of get to see a lot of data go through you, whether it's a consumer or a merchant or whichever. Any interesting data insights, any ways that we can think of dimensioning what has been the let's call it the policy dividend. How do you put into numbers what has been this dividend that India has reaped?
I think not that we have too much visibility in the demographics of the data. But I do believe, what we all keep looking at is that despite the numbers we are at today, we are possibly only 40–50% there in terms of the job done. And number two, we are heavily tilted towards maybe more west and south. And I think a lot needs to be done in north and east. Maybe it's cultural, maybe it's political, maybe whatever it is, behavioral, but there is a lot of work to do. And then I think the last one I think is more also segments like older, younger, dependents, which are yet to be solved. So you will see a lot of products we are doing now, UPI Circle, XYZ, are trying to focus on that. And to also say that how you can build that little bit of trust by extending small little, mandates and help them do small time payments rather than being dependent on cash all the time. So I think that's the insight.
Since we seem to be running out of time, let me kind of get on to one quick question, final questions for each of you. Anirban, if you had to ask of the RBI, if you had to, one policy that you want to see or come up, what would that be?
I think credit line on UPI for larger NBFCs, I think, can have a very multiplicative impact on the economy.
Mahendra, any pain point that you still think that's left for consumers that can be solved, either by you or anybody in the ecosystem? One thing we can all focus on.
I think, customers are divinely discontent. So just because you solved current day's problems doesn't mean they'll not have a problem tomorrow. I feel an area which we'll have to, collectively as an industry, the regulator, NPCI, all of us have to look at, I feel, is authentication. It's so foundational to everything that we do on a day-to-day basis in every transaction, every customer. And I think we have made giant steps in terms of, starting with, hey, 2FA on every transaction, then now making alternate factors available that makes it seamless. But I think that journey is going to be ongoing. And I think the more you do that, the more trusted customers you get, the more trusted endpoints, more trusted transactions, more customers that you can underwrite for things like credit. I think I feel it is, like, I'll just use one anecdote. I know we are slightly over time. When I first moved to the US, I was just blown away by the fact that there is a social security number that identifies every citizen. Today we have Aadhaar and the rest is history. When I was in business school, Nandan came to our business school and gave a lecture on Aadhaar even before Aadhaar was created. To me, the power of authentication in terms of building a great citizenry cannot be underestimated, and I think payments has a very fundamental role to play in accelerating that.
Great. Deeksha, one lesson India's journey, India's payment stack can teach the world.
That speed and scale can go hand in hand. And I think Mahendra spoke of tokenization. It's a great example. We have 1 billion tokens. We have a lot of countries in the Visa network asking, how can we learn from this experience?
Nalin, again, putting a bit on the spot. The GFF has seen more product launches from your side than the rest of the industry combined. What is the one big thing that you will do in 2026 that we don't know yet?
I don't know.
So as he thinks of it, all these questions aren't just, it's just to kind of get answers all in good spirit.
I think my answer lies in what I said earlier. You move with the crowd. I don't think there is a fixed answer. So as transaction and volumes are growing, Anirban spoke about credit line. I think that's certainly our long-term goal, because that's one problem to be solved for sure. How we solve it, I don't know, but I think we don't understand credit as much as everybody else. But I think it needs to be solved.
Sir, in the same spirit of me asking questions of these, I will ask you one, two. You, of course, have the privilege choosing whether to answer or not. what is the one principle that you, as an institution, will not dilute or compromise on, irrespective of how markets or we all might think as businesses we build?
Well, it's easier than I thought it would be. I guess public first. I don't ever see Reserve Bank of India, kind of diluting that or thinking of anything else. If it has to be one thing, it has to be public first. And of course, in the context of the theme of this session, if I can just take a minute, the context was innovation. So just want to dispel this feeling. When we think of innovation, we think in terms of something radical, disruptive, so on and so forth. Well, I think some of our policies have conveyed over the years that we can be innovative without being disruptive. So I guess I would leave it.
Wonderful set of answers. Thank you for seeing such a great panel and taking on some of these uncomfortable questions. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vasu.